Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're chatting with Gavan Brown from Roxley Games, the publisher of some truly epic titles such as Brass, Radlands, Santorini, Dice Throne, amongst many more. Their newest title, Skyrise, is currently on Kickstarter. Gavan, welcome to the binge. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. Now, clearly, you've got a pretty robust portfolio of some pretty successful games, I guess is a good way to put it. You've been doing this for 15 years. How did this all start? Like, what were you doing before you got into publishing games?
Well, I would say the 15 years is probably, when I started actually designing games.
Okay.
But Roxley started as a publisher, and I think our first game was 2014. But it had kind of worked up towards that. When I was designing games, I started invoicing as the company name Roxley, and then eventually I decided to start publishing games as well. But I used to do, board game art under the Roxley name as well. So.
So you started off as like a board game artist and then transitioned to kind of game design and game publishing from there, or?
Yeah, well, game design is. I actually wanted to be a. I wanted to be a game designer since probably my mid 20s.
Yeah.
And first it started out as me wanting to be a video game designer because I come from the video game world, as many people in this industry do.
Yeah.
I was I am a programmer. Was a programmer. Don't do that anymore. But I really, have loved video games. Been obsessed with video games all my life. Um, I eventually, I guess around the time I was sort of wanting to, I was designing, design documents, creating design documents for video games, and
Yeah.
investigating technologies that maybe I could, make an indie game myself. This was right before the cusp of when, I guess, things Xbox Live Arcade or whatever were started becoming popularized, pre Super Meat Boy sort of era.
Okay.
So there was not really tools that I could do it alone, and I swiftly sort of realized the amount of work to produce one game was just insane. One video game, it's kind of like a pipe
Years,
dream, or it
right?
was, right? Yeah. And even now, if you want to make a good indie video game, it's a huge commitment per title, right? And so I decided, I actually, I was still going down that road, and I went over to my wife's cousin's house, and my wife's cousin's husband said, "Hey, you want to play a game?" And he was holding a Carcassonne with this weird looking knight on the front,
Yeah.
and his strange sort of 2D illustration. Those kind of it was very, I don't know, gritty, I guess, not very, it just looked very I don't know. The illustration was very gritty, I guess, for
Yeah.
the original Carcassonne. But I loved it. So I tried. I was first thing I asked him was, "Is it good?" And he said, "No, it's not good. That's why we play it." And so, because I'd come, my assumptions were how many people come into this hobby was and less so now that it's becoming more and more mainstream. But back then in 2005, 2006, my assumption, like many others, is that board games are shitty, they're pretty bad, because there were the only board games that most people knew about were ones that you get from a department store, Monopoly. That's what I think. And there were some party games growing up that I love, like Balderdash and Trivial Pursuit and Pictionary, which started all kinds of family fights, but those were good social times, and I'm attracted to social gaming. So I was like, yeah, let's play it. And after that game, I just kind of sat there staring at the board, just absolutely mind blown that it introduced me to systems that I'd never experienced in a game before.
Yeah.
Even video games, because video games are generally and they're kind of they've evolved over time. But back then, it was a lot of it's like fighting each other, or
Yeah.
racing each other, and always, there was a lot of turn-based games, but nothing like really economical, right? And nothing like, even though Carcassonne is like technically a competitive game, it was very constructive, and it was like it brought all these feelings that I'd never felt before playing a game.
Yeah.
And I kind of stared at the board and like what we've built together, and I was immediately like, I want to do this for the rest of my life. I want to make these things.
That's
And I
awesome.
became very, very obsessed with board games in a relatively quickly. And then I started, designing a soccer game that I worked on for like 5 years probably.
Oh, wow.
And while that game was, kind of a failure in the end, well, it was a failure in the end. Like I went through probably like 30 iterations of a prototype. It really actually was what taught me kind of how board games work,
Yeah.
and how to design board games. And it also led me to a group that I was a co-founder in, called the Game Artisans of Canada,
Mm.
which was start born out of a meeting of a lot of game designers from Western Canada in 2008. Everybody met in Calgary at the Century Box, and it was like a night of everybody playing each other's prototypes, and it was just a group of people. And then the next day, it was such a revolutionary experience, because back then it was very lonely to design a game.
Yeah.
You can get your family, kind of convince a couple friends to play test your prototype, but it was generally a very lonely an activity. So the next day, immediately after, we said we have to like keep this going. So we created together. We decided to make a group called the Game Artisans of Canada, and I set up a online forum, and it was a very tightly knit, private community where people could, designers could share, their designs and feel safe. It was like very much a circle of trust. There was only like 8 or 10 members,
Yeah.
and they could give feedback on each other's designs. And then we started creating local chapters where we would play test once a week. And this was actually very new, at least in this part of the world. This was an unheard of concept. So,
What
and it
year was this?
really,
Just around like 2000 or a little bit later than
no,
that?
it was around like, it was that I think Game Artisans was incepted in 2008.
Okay.
But this was before. And then, so like shortly thereafter, like the board game design forum, BGDF, was created, which was kind of like Game Artisans of Canada, but it was public.
Mm.
And then there's some IRC channels started sprouting up. But that was kind of, for us anyways, for all of us, we'd never experienced anything outside of it. And I'm not saying we invented that or anything. I'm
Yeah.
just saying that for us, it was very much kind of like really started to develop the board game design industry, or in Canada. And so I'm very thankful that I got to participate, and I still know and I'm friends with a lot of people from that group. So yeah, it's since been kind of like dissolved, just because of it's not really necessary thing in today's world, with
Yeah.
endless Facebook groups and support and blogs, and all their board game design and tabletop simulator, and board game designers just have endless
Tools.
resources
Yeah.
now. But back then it was quite it was quite difficult and quite lonely. Yeah.
It's ironic when you're talking about Carcassonne. That was one of the first ones I had played as kind of in the new kind of indie industry of games. That, and of course, Catan, like everyone else. And but the first time I ever played that was actually on an Xbox. Like, I own the
Great.
game,
Yeah,
and
that's a good.
I've never played it at a table. I've only played it the digital version, because I guess the tiles and everything go. I mean, it happens very quickly, right? Scoring and everything, but it got me hooked, right? When you see that game, and you're like, wow, this is different than kind of the classics that we grew up with, right? This is a whole nother
Totally.
world. And the more of those different types of games you play, Catan, and they just kind of all add together to this whole new kind of genre. And that's, I think, for a lot of people, when the bug kind of bites them, right? And they say, oh, this is kind of interesting. Maybe I can get involved in this industry in some way. Where did Roxley as a name come from? Like, I gotta say, you have one of the coolest logos I've ever seen. Right, like the
Thanks.
steampunk chicken is just awesome. But where's the genesis of all that?
Roxley is, I would consider it an abstract name. So it's it's really just a set of syllables that sound good together.
Okay.
I like rocks, like kind of, that rocks, or like it's kind of a syllable
Hmm.
it rolls off the tongue well. It's also, I also found a 6 character domain name, so as simple as it sounds, it took me years to actually come up with the name. For years and years I've done graphic design and branding.
Hmm.
Um, that since I was 16 years old, I was doing websites for my mom and her friends and stuff. And I've done hundreds and hundreds of company logos, so I was very, very obsessed with, and I'm a graphic designer, so I was very obsessed with graphic design and branding for a very, very long time. So like obviously Roxley, um, was a company name that took me a long time to come up with, because that was kind of what I wanted my permanent name to kind of be. And really it's just abstract, and really it kind of I wanted to just kind of create metaphors in terms of what the logo represents. Like there's this chicken, he's got, or rooster, he's got this, these goggles on. Goggles kind of represent innovation, and we call it a game laboratory, because I'm really most interested in games that do something different.
Mm.
Being a person that's kind of played every sort of video game and board game in existence, like I have a very, very broad, I guess, scope of experience with games in general.
Hmm.
So when I'm looking at, what kind of games like really interest me, I really gravitate to ones that have something new, something that I can learn from, some kind of system that I've never played before. So I wanted to really show that that's kind of what we're seeking in the company, right? So you have this chicken, he's looking off into the distance. Maybe they're launching a rocket over there or something,
Yeah.
like where he's looking. He's watching maybe his invention kind of come to life. And a rooster is just really confident, and I really wanted the logo to exude, confidence, and that we put a lot of work into whatever we're doing.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of just a lot of metaphor in terms of the visuals, and obviously roosters are very beautiful. So
Yeah. And then, so in transitioning from that in the design into then finally doing, was Brass the first kind of epic hit for you guys, or?
well, Santorini, I would say,
Yeah,
I think Santorini has sold more copies than Brass.
got it. It's a
And
fun game.
Santorini, yeah,
Yeah, I
Santorini
love Santorini.
was the first one. Or sorry, it wasn't the first game we did, but the first game we did was called Super Motherload.
Yeah.
But Santorini was the first probably hit game that we had.
Hmm.
So, and yeah, that was before Brass. Yeah.
And then, but Brass was Santorini one that you had designed as well, or had just developed?
We had so a friend of mine, Gord Hamilton from Calgary.
Yeah.
He 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 designed that game in the 80s.
Yeah.
And basically we I actually came to him, and he had he had the game stuck in kind of contract hell with this company that had endless ability to extend the contract and
Oh
never
boy.
produce the game.
Yeah.
And it was kind of that way for years. But there was a clause in the contract where it auto renews unless, it auto renews if they give him, uh, they inform him that it's going to auto renew. And that one year it was like getting close to the renewal time. They had not given him the notification, and we let it get to the date, and then I sent them an email saying, "Hey, we're going to publish this game, so you don't have rights to it anymore."
Was there any
And
resistance or?
no, no.
Wow.
I mean, which is fair. They had rights to it for years and years and years. But at that time the game was just, like, not just. It was a bunch of like white blocks, and it was actually very beautiful. It was very abstract, right?
Yeah.
And so I had this crazy idea that we would kind of take this abstract game, because the attitude back then was, abstract games don't sell,
Yeah.
and all the salespeople we work with, hey, we're gonna make this game. well, abstract games don't sell, right? So, I was like, well, let's make it non-abstract, right? Because what is abstract? Santorini is actually pretty thematic
Yeah.
for, we actually call it a pure strategy game. There's no obfuscated information from the players, and it's very deterministic in how it plays.
Yep.
Um, but it's not really abstract. It's actually quite thematic in how the board develops. Even in the abstract version of it, there's domes and blocks and stuff, and it kind of looks the same, but it with more geometrically perfect shapes, I guess. And then so I said, why don't we make these kind of like plastic bits that are like molded, and I
Yeah.
wanted, I had a little diagram of the island that I created. And then the craziest thing was like we're gonna make the god characters, because it's a Greek god theme,
Yep.
and we're gonna take these god characters and we're gonna apply like sort of a Japanese chibi sort of style to them.
Mm.
And Mr. Cuddington, the artist that we were working with on it, they actually couldn't really do Japanese style art. So it actually they have like the big heads and they're really cute, but then they didn't look Japanese. They kind of look like Disney
Yeah.
characters. So then it kind of like out of like accidentally kind of made its kind of turn into its own style, which we people were calling Chisney. So it's like chibi Disney characters.
Yeah.
So it actually worked out perfectly because we actually kind of got something new out of it. And but when I first showed the concept of these characters to people, they were like it's awesome. It's really weird that
Yeah.
you're like making this game about Greek gods, and you're making these like babyish, like adolescent sort of looking characters with giant heads, and it's very cartoony, and it's like it just hadn't really been done before, where first of all you're applying really a theme of a strong theme onto an abstract game, but also in such a weird kind of way. But it ended up really working, and you know it without yeah, it ended up really working, and a lot of that was like the table presence of like what Mr. Cuddington did with bringing the island kind of that island
Yeah.
design, and I wanted it to taper, and so we worked very well together on that game, and it ended up being arguably our strongest in terms of like mass appeal
Yeah.
that we've created to date.
Well, good luck finding a game cafe that doesn't have that game. I've
It's
seen it
true. It's a
literally in
perfect game cafe game.
every game cafe I've gone to. I see Santorini there, and usually somebody playing it. Amazing table presence, but it's very easy to explain how to play. Like you can pick the game up very, very
Totally.
quick, right? And I think that's
Yeah.
why it does so well in that environment. And it is abstract, but it's very thematic at the same time. So I think that's pretty awesome. Your new title, Skyrise. I mean, talk about table presence. I mean, as soon as I saw this
Yeah.
campaign, I was like, holy crap. Like, this is how you do table presence, right? Like, everything is like three-dimensional molds.
Yeah.
The board, it's modular. The board size is smaller if you have less players. The buildings themselves are each custom sculpted. Like, it is like the decision to do that. Was that there from the beginning, or is it something that just kind of snowballed until you got to that final product?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's kind of like the scope kind of kept creeping, because I always want to, like, for me growing up, I remember games like Survive and stuff that
Yeah,
were
yeah.
on the table,
Oh, that
and they
game.
had such amazing, beautiful table presence, or like Fireball Island. Like I remember just seeing that at my friend's house, and I just was obsessed with the aesthetics of things like that. So I'm really attracted to 3D 3D table presence in games. And so it's kind of persisted throughout, what we do, and not all of our games have that, but I'm actually really attracted to that concept. So I wanted to kind of, City in the Sky, and we decided on the City in the Sky sort of theme, because it really fit with the mechanisms we thought.
Yeah.
And we wanted to really communicate that feeling of something being in the sky, and we did that by creating these kind of islands that kind of floated over a skyboard. um So, it's like it, there is obviously snowballing, and that's kind of like my superpower and my downfall as a publisher is because there's a lot of pressure on publishers to release more stuff, right? All
Yeah.
the time, release more stuff. And we put such an insane amount of work, like, so when you say, okay, we're gonna have all these 3D islands, it just opens up a whole can of like complexity that you don't even realize or understand yet. And so at multiple points, I was ready to like can it and be like, okay, let's just maybe release it at Essen and just make it, flat boards, which we're still doing like a retail version,
Yeah.
and there's going to be quite a bit of difference between the two. The other one's made of wood and boards, but I still really wanted to make a fully 3D version for the people that really want to play something like that has a sort of an enhanced sort of table presence and theme. And that's not it's not for everyone, nor should it be. It's a different kind of experience, and I think it's great to to make something like that for the people that want that sort of experience. So that's what we kept traveling down that road. And it took a lot of time. And our the person that we most recently hired, James Vanekerk, who designed Valor and Villainy with Skybound, and he's just very talented at a lot of things. But 3D is one of the things that he's most talented at. And he kind of entered the equation, and kind of like, so because we had multiple iterations of what these skyboard, the sort of steampunky mechanical
Yeah.
stuff around the edges look like. And then he came in and he finally kind of got something going that really impressed me and made me feel like, okay, this is worth it. This does need to exist, kind of thing. And same with the building sculpts, right? So he's just put so much work and time into it, and research. Like, we chose four different genres of art and design, that the artists kind of represent in the game, or
Yep.
the visionaries. And they're kind of like, advocates or ambassadors for a specific genre of art that's either related to what they actually created or that's from their homeland. And so we took all sorts of reference points from many, many, many different the actual buildings and sculptures of those styles in real life, and he used those to kind of create our own set of original pieces. Yeah, so it's like tons and tons of work. Like too much work,
Lots of
probably,
molds.
honestly.
Lots
Yeah,
of molds.
yeah,
Holy smokes. It's one of those things where you look at it and you're like, the basic version looks good,
yeah,
but it's tough not to want to grab the
yeah,
deluxe, right? Like the collector's edition. Like, it's just so much. Like, I can't think of another game that's got this much intricate detail, even
yeah,
around like the sides of the board and in between the
yeah,
board pieces. Like, it's crazy.
yeah.
How would you best describe this game? So for someone who's actually listening and can't see the visuals I just flashed up on the screen, how would you describe the basic essence of how to play this game?
Well, it's a round-based auction game where each person is either bidding, they're bidding, or like increasing the bid, or sorry, outbidding the previous person that bid, or everybody passes, and then whoever's currently got the highest bid building in the current auction gets to build their structure. And each player has 13 structures that they're going to build. 12 of them are actual buildings, and then they have one wonder piece. Each of those buildings have a number on them, so they represent a build, and they also represent something that you built that when is built, you actually are going to score points for.
Hmm.
When you're doing the auction, you start either in the middle or you start adjacent to any other building that's already built. And then every time somebody outbids you, or you want to outbid somebody else, that bid needs to be placed adjacent to any bid that's currently that or sorry to it has to outbid the highest current bid. Um, and so the game's played over two halves. So you actually what's so crazy about the game is that there's essentially you're only building 13 buildings, right?
Yeah.
So really, like you could say, well, there's actually only 13 actions in the whole game, but there's so much nuance in like forcing people to outbid you, because it's like we're not bidding for the same object for a bidding round. It's because this, you're bidding on whatever you place your current bid on.
Yep.
You're bidding for that space, and that space comes with a resource or a disc that serves a specific function. So adjacent to that bid that's placed, there's four other potential bids that somebody can outbid you for, right?
Yeah.
It's like an auction game that's each auction round evolves, right? So it constantly keeps you engaged, like unless you pass for this bidding round, you're constantly engaged because you might want to move a bid over to somewhere else on the board, to get something that you want, or you can identify something that one of your opponents wants. So you place next to it a high building because to force them to build one of their higher buildings.
Yeah.
And actually a ton of nuance into how the bidding structure works.
And then how the
And then
patrons
there's
come in, like how to, because there's objective cards and then there's patron cards, I guess too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the objective card, there's objective cards, and they're called panoramas. And so with the panorama cards, they'll say like build three adjacent, for each island that you have three adjacent buildings, you score three, I think it's 3 points. Um, and so if you fulfill that objective any number of times, you score that many points, both at the half. So if you do it before the first half is over, then you get points, for those, and then at the end of the game as well. So you can actually score double, because those buildings persist. And then there's patrons as well. So patrons is probably actually the last kind of mechanic that we kind of added into the game. And once we added that in, I was like, this game's done. The game, took multiple years of development. Um, it was always like so close.
Yeah.
And you know, like you've developed games, so you understand and understand that, but sometimes you got to put a game away, right? And,
Oh yeah.
and bring it off the shelf. So the patrons is probably the mechanic that I'm actually most happy with. I think it was Paul's idea. So Paul, helped is a developer with us, and he came up with the idea, I believe, to have these like there's these discs that have letters on them, and you pick up that you when you win an auction on a space that has a disc, you collect the disc. The disc has a letter on it, so it says B. You pick up the B patron token and you look on the bottom of it, and that's how much every B is worth at the end of the
Mm.
game, including the one that you just collected. So they range, it's 3, 4, 5, and 8 are the values. So you might have picked up the 3, and oh, that's the crappy one. But you might say yes, like so. There's actually a little bit of bluffing, and you know and quite a bit of deduction, and so if you do pick up the 8 first, right? So I got a B that's an 8. I'm, I want the other B's on the board, but I can't be too obvious, right? And just start bidding on the B's, because you're just immediately giving away how valuable they are, right?
Yeah.
So you have to kind of bide your time. You have to watch what other people are bidding, and kind of get their build. So often you'll be like, I'm just gonna pass because I want this guy to, or this person to bid their high building, and I want to get that out of the way so I can get this other thing that I want. And often those are patrons. And then so then there's the wonder buildings, which are something that were added, kind of three-quarters of the way through development, which are awesome. They're special buildings, and they automatically win an auction. You get one of them. In a
Mm.
two-player, you get two, which just makes two-player, because they're so satisfying. They're just so satisfying to use, and they kind of create a sort of structure of almost like how you want to play the second half of the game. So you get three of those. You get three cards that is going to determine what your wonder structure does. And you get to you pick which one you think you can max out the most points for. But the higher the value, there's like an initiative value on each wonder card. So the higher the initiative value, the lower, or sorry, the lower the initiative value of a card you take, the sooner you're going to get to go in turn order. Or sorry, the more likely you are to go to start an auction in the first second half. So, and yeah, that's kind of the gist of the game. At the end of the game, you score points for there's neighborhood discs that you collect that are colored. So as you're collecting those and placing them in the corresponding rows, so if I collect a yellow like neighborhood disc and I place it in the yellow row, it's like it's increasing the value of every structure
Okay,
that
like
I've
multipliers.
constructed in a yellow neighborhood at the end of the game. So if I'm at 6, which is kind of like the primo column to be in. So if I've collected 3 yellows, every building that I've built in yellow will score 6 points at the end of the game. If you and you can actually sometimes push other players into collecting more than they need, one more than they need, which then it actually reduces the value of all their buildings in those areas to 4. So there's actually this sweet spot that you want to hit, but there's also a kind of a shoot the moon mechanism, which we've seen happen several times in playtesting, and people have won with it.
Yep.
It's hard and it's a big risk, but if you keep collecting the discs of a single color, you can actually shoot the moon and collect 8 points for every 1/4 that you collect. So there's a ton of nuance to the game, and it really rewards repetitive play, but it's also a game that's quite simple to pick up
Yeah.
and understand. And after I feel like it feels like hundreds of play tests. I'm still very excited and interested to play every time I play it. So
Well, certainly, there's a lot of people that are interested in this game. You guys have hit $431,000 on a goal of 50,000 so far. Still, you got a week to go. There's always the back end hockey stick, so we know that number is going to grow significantly. The only thing that surprised me about that, quite frankly, is that your initial goal was only 50,000. Like, this looks like it'd be a very costly game to make.
mm.
What was kind of the thoughts behind that?
Well, we were willing to. We're always willing to. It's definitely not about look at how overfunded we are. We're willing to put in our own, like
Cash
Roxley's
and
money.
yeah.
We don't expect every single campaign we do to not have any skin in the game from Roxley.
Hmm.
And I think backers like I think as a backer you kind of want that.
Yeah.
You want the publisher to have skin in the game for all of these projects. And like make no mistake, a company like ours definitely needs Kickstarter to survive. Like we
Oh
run
yeah.
a very thin shop. We don't, very like we only have like 4 people on staff. We have, quite a few collaborators that we work with,
Sure.
but like our actual employees, there's only 4 of us, right? Yeah, but we also work with contractors. But to run like such a like tight ship and a small team of because my objective as a creator is really to work with the most passionate people in the industry. That's I want to be surrounded by passionate people who love what they're doing and they want to do a good job and they want to make new things passionately,
Yeah.
And so to do that, we need tools like Kickstarter because we don't have big sales departments and stuff like that. And Kickstarter really allows us to connect to our customer base directly. Like people, it's kind of like I would say the modern version of going to a trade show. Honestly,
Yeah.
it's a show that's a month long, and it's like here's our new game. We're launching it at our show
Yeah.
called Kickstarter, and we're interacting directly with our fans. We're talking to them. We're giving them a discount. We're giving them freebies. All of these things already existed at a show. Like that was the crowdfunding. With a show, you actually have to print the whole run before you go to
Yeah.
the show. Um, so this allows us to kind of you know obviously though there's the whole marketing aspect. Does this product deserve to exist, right? When you just print a game and you go to a show, maybe that product shouldn't have existed because maybe it was a failure at the show, right?
Yeah.
Like and in this sort of industry of like always more games, more games.
Yeah.
um I think it's actually a good thing, and it's a it's a good thing that creators are only like on Kickstarter are making things that they have evidence that people want to buy, rather than making a bunch of copies of a thing that people don't actually want.
Yeah, and then you
Right?
see it in a liquidation bin somewhere, or
Exactly.
it's almost like a if you go back 30, 40 years, like test marketing, right? It's exactly what the larger companies would have done. They would have done a small market with with a small run to find out, is the audience there? Do we need to retool and readjust before they do their main runs? But it allows smaller publishers who are quite frankly bringing all the creativity and innovation into the industry to survive, right? And I think that's a good thing for the industry, quite frankly.
Totally, like a game like Santorini, like the cost of the molds for a game like Santorini and how different and innovative like at least the production was, it could not have existed in the way that it existed without Kickstarter. It's impossible.
Yeah.
It's impossible. No company would have looked at a prototype of that and been like, yeah, let's do this, right? It's just too weird and strange. Basically.
I think this game is a perfect example of that as well. The deluxe version, not a chance that would be launched mass market without some kind of pre-order system. Like, not a chance, right? So what comes after this? So I mean, you guys obviously have a number of franchises you've built. What's the next big title from Roxley? Is it an extension of one of your other franchises? Is it something new? What can we expect?
When I've said this before publicly, but we're working on another brass game. So obviously we want to continue the brass line. We have a couple other. I don't like announcing things anymore too early, right? Because, but we have several other. We have a project we're working on with Mr. Cuddington.
Yeah.
That's quite epic in scope, but it's quite something. It's something quite different that we've never done and we've never really seen kind of implemented, especially in the way we're implementing it before. And there's always more. We have a puzzle game that's not a puzzle game, but like kind of like, I guess you could call it a puzzle game. A 2-player game that's, I guess, kind of abstract, that is kind of in the Santorini vein of products.
Nice.
And then like Dice Throne is just a continuing the continuing franchise that it's kind of a machine that always needs to be fed somehow. Like it's a game that revolves around product releases. So there will always be something coming down the pipe for Dice Throne. So I mean, kind of extending brass and then working on a couple new things as well is kind of where we're going.
A couple other surprises. Well, again, congrats on this game. I mean, you guys are doing amazing on this title. It looks, I'm going to back it myself. I mean, I can't not back this game. It looks so awesome. But I want to wish you all the best with this campaign. For people that want to check this out, I will put a link in the Kickstarter notes. You can do that, or quite frankly, just type in Skyrise on Kickstarter and you'll find it. There's still 7 days ago if people want to check it out. Gavin, thanks again for your time. I want to wish you all the best this coming year.
Thanks, James.
Take care. Cheers. This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply subscribe to our YouTube channel, Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.